Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another tutorial in 3D Studio Max. This time, we're going to be taking a look at how to create a 3D movie title. That looks a little something like this. Right, so the first thing we need to do is create the title for our movie. And to do that, we'll need to be in the Create tab under the Shape section. In the Shape section, we can select Text, and we'll just click anywhere in our scene. Now we have our text here, we just need the title for our movie. Something big, something cool, like Mega. It's a little too short, so let's call it Mega. Oh, that's too long now. How about just Omega? That's a cool word. I'm sure there's a movie already called this, but I bet this one's going to do much better in the theaters. How do I know that? Because this is my tutorial and I make the rules. So we have the title for our movie. Let's go ahead and pick a font. Now, there's tons and tons of fonts that you can choose from. I'd recommend avoiding fonts that are very complicated and hard to read like these. Plus, fonts like these will cause problems for you in 3D Studio Max later on when you've converted them to a 3D object and are trying to work with them. So I know you may be tempted to use a font like this for your next horror movie, but let's just stick with something simple for now. So I already know the font I want to use. It's a pretty popular font right now. This looks like the font they use everywhere for the new Catching Fire movie. It's also, I think, been used in Star Trek quite a bit. It's interesting and clean at the same time. Good font. So let's go ahead and just adjust our kerning so our letters are a little closer together. Alright, we don't want them to overlap at all, but we don't want them to be 30 yards away from each other either. So we have the title for our movie and the font we're going to be using. The next step is to make the title three-dimensional. So to do that, we'll need our text selected, and we'll need to be in the Modify tab. Under the Modifier list drop-down, we just want to select Bevel. Simple as that. Now let's turn off Realistic here, because this is just going to cause problems. Okay, if we swing our camera around here, Bevel doesn't look like it's doing anything. But that's because we need to move down to the Bevel values and adjust the height of our letters. Something around there looks good. And we also want to add a little edge to the front face of our text. And that'll just help catch the light a little bit and make our letters not so blocky. So let's go ahead and check the level 2 box. Just raise the height a little bit and lower the outline. And you'll see by doing that, we get this little lip on the edge of our text. And when we render, these new edges just catch the light in a much more interesting way. Good, we have our font ready to go. Let's stand it upright because it'll drive me nuts if we don't. Just 90 degrees, standing upright. Move it to the center. There we go, looking good so far. Let's put a texture on this thing. First, before we do that, we'll need to go to our render settings, down to Assign Render, and make sure we're in Mental Ray. And now we're going to open up the material editor. So I'm just going to switch this to the compact editor just to save a little space here. Let's go ahead and just drag this first material onto our text. Then we'll click where it says Standard, and I want to select Mental Ray Arc and Design. Press OK. And Arc and Design has a lot of good default templates. And since I want this text to be sort of metallic looking, I'm going to drop down the templates. Down to the bottom, it'll say metals, and I'll just select brushed metal. Now when we render our text, you'll see it's got a really nice brushed metal look. And to make sure our texture is being applied to our object properly, I'm going to add a UVW map. So make sure you're in the Modify tab, you have your text selected, and UVW map, and we'll just check box. Good, we've created our movie title, we've textured it, and we're going to move along to making this look good with some lights. Let's make sure we're back in the Create tab and select lights. So we're not going to want photometric this time, we're going to want standard instead. I'm just going to select MR Area Omni, and I'm going to drop it right behind and a little above our title. Good. Let's adjust a few of the light settings. We'll make sure the light is selected and go to our Modify tab. Yes, the light is on. Yes, we want the shadows to be ray trace shadows. And if we drop down intensity, color, attenuation, I want to change the light decay from none to inverse square. And I'll just change the size until it slightly overlaps our text. So when we render, we'll get these nice backlit highlights on our title. Good. Probably a little bright. We can drop it down. We don't want the light to really blow out too much, but we want it to be bright enough to make some good highlights. All right. So now that that light is set up, I'm going to duplicate this same light by holding down Shift on the keyboard and dragging it all the way in front so that it just slightly overlaps our title from the front. So basically the same thing as before. The back one overlaps a little bit from behind and the front one overlaps a little bit from the front. Except this time, since we want our title to be backlit, we don't want this front light to be quite so powerful. So I'm just going to turn the multiplier intensity down to 0.1. Now when we render, the back is still bright and the front has been illuminated a little more. So let's just go ahead, grab our front light again, hold down Shift on the keyboard, duplicate one to the right, and duplicate one to the left. So we'll have these three less intense lights in the front and one much more intense lighter in the back. And when we render, it gives us a nice metallic-y looking title. All right, our lighting's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and animate our title. Now in our test animation, each letter of our title rotated independently. But as you can see here, if we rotate our title, the whole thing swings around together. That's because technically this title is one big piece right now. So we'll need to separate each letter into an individual part. To do that, we're going to detach each letter. So let's right click on our title, go to Convert to Editable Poly. With our text converted to an editable poly, we want to use the element selection mode. And what that'll let us do is, because each of the letters aren't actually connected to each other, we can select the whole letter independently from the other letters. So let's start with A. All I need to do is roll down here to detach, rename it to A, and press OK. Same with the G. Select it, detach, G, OK. E, detach, rename it to E, press OK. And you guys get the idea from here. By the time you get to the O, it'll be its own individual part anyway, so we just need to rename it and don't have to worry about detaching it. All right, let's get at Editable Poly and fix another problem. And that problem is, even though we've separated each one of these letters, they still all rotate together like they're one piece. And that's because even though we've separated each of the letters, the pivot points are still all the same. Luckily, there's an easy fix for this. We're going to change all the letters' pivot points so that the pivot point is in the middle of each letter. So we'll select all the letters, make sure we're in the Hierarchy tab, third one over. We're going to select Affect Pivot Point Only and Center to Object. That'll make all the pivot points jump to the center of each letter. So turn that off. Now, if we select each of our letters, woo, each letter spins independently with a pivot point in the center. And just a quick word of advice, you want to make sure when you're changing the pivot point into Hierarchy tab that you're on the Rotate tool. If you're not on the Rotate tool and you're on, say, the Move tool, it won't quite work out right. All right, problem solved. Let's move on to animating this title. So first we'll make sure all of our letters are selected and we want to have our Rotate tool selected, and we'll move down and select Auto Key. Now with Auto Key turned on, we want our letters to start rotated 90 degrees. Actually, let's rotate them the other way so that their backs are facing. So they're rotated 90 degrees, and say over the course of 3 seconds, we want them to straighten out. So 30 frames a second, 3 seconds, 90 frames. Let's move ahead to frame number 90 and rotate all of our letters back. So now you can see when I hit play, they all turn and rotate. Good, rotation's done. Now for the second part of this animation, I actually had the letters spread out in the beginning and then had them kind of come back together. I'm gonna switch to my move tool. So I'm gonna jump back to frame 90 and put a keyframe here for our position, since this is where we want our letters to end up. And then I'll slide back down to frame 0. With the moves tool still selected, I'll just separate the letters a little further. I'll put the O over there and the A about the same distance apart, and the M and the G, so that they're all much farther spread apart at frame 0. And since we set a keyframe at frame 90, they will stop right there. I'm just going to tweak the rotation of the letters here in the beginning so that they are completely straight. And then I can turn auto key off. And this is what we get. Alright, the letters animate on nicely. Let's go ahead and create ourselves a camera. So I'm going to hit Control and C on the keyboard to create a new camera. And I don't want to be in the camera view, so I'll hit P on the keyboard to go back to perspective, and there's our newly created camera. And what I'd like to do is, starting at frame 0, I'll have the camera slowly move away from our letters as they form together. So I will turn auto key back on, keyframe for frame 0, and move ahead. Let's see, we want this animation to be about 10 seconds long, so let's open up our time configuration and set the length to 300. 10 seconds at 30 frames a second becomes 300 frames, and we'll press OK. So let's move all the way over towards the end here and move our camera back. And if we press C on the keyboard to jump back into our camera view, we can watch sort of how the animation will look. It actually might be a little too slow, so let's go back in our perspective view and just on the last frame here, move our camera even further back. Turn auto key off, and it looks pretty good. Alright, one last thing I want to do before we render this off. I want to create a little highlight that flies by from left to right on the fronts of our letters. And you'll see exactly what that looks like later on when I render this out. So in perspective mode, I'm just going to take one of these lights I've already created and hold shift on the keyboard to duplicate it and bring it forward. I'll bring it up a little higher than the rest. And then in the modify settings for the light, I want to make sure I turn off shadows. Scroll down to advanced effects and turn off diffuse. I just want it to affect the specularity. That way it doesn't mess up the lighting at all. It'll just create this nice little highlight here on the tops of our letters. So good. I'm just going to animate this to fly by starting around here. So I'll turn on auto key, move my light over away from the O. We'll move the time slider from the beginning to the end, then move the light to the other side. Good. So that'll just fly by very slowly. We got an extra frame here we don't need at the beginning, so go ahead and delete that. Now I want to show you guys how to render this animation off so you can import it into After Effects and do a little tweaking if you want to. Okay, let's do some rendering. I'm going to open up my render setting tab, and I want to make sure common is selected. First thing you want to change is you want your time output to be from single frame to the active time segment, which is what your entire bar is down here. If you would want to render out just part of this animation, you could set it from like frame 40 to frame 100 if that's what you want to do. But for us, we can just leave it on active time segment. Next up, we want to render this out in HD, so we're going to change the output size to HD video. And we don't need 1920. Let's just do, I'm just going to do 1280 for the sake of the tutorial. Good. Move down a little farther, and we want to make sure these files are saving somewhere. So I'm going to check Save File and open up where I want the output file to save. Just save it to my tutorials, movie title, and I'll just make a new folder in here called Title render. And we'll just rename this to title. And we're going to change the format to, I guess that's a little bit off the screen, isn't it there? And we're going to make it a TIFF sequence. TIFF. And when we hit save, it's going to ask us to change our settings. We just want to make sure it's on 8-bit color, not 8-bit grayscale. And we want it to store the alpha channel. No compression and everything else looks good. We're going to press OK. And before I hit the render button, I want to make sure it's rendering out the camera view that we set up earlier and not the perspective view. So I'll hit C on the keyboard to make sure we're in our camera view. And away we go. So if you got a pretty good computer, I'll see you in about 15 to 20 minutes. If you got a bad computer, well, I'll see you next week. Assuming everyone has survived the render, I'm going to go over a quick few things that you can do in After Effects to really make your renders pop. I'm not going to go into too much detail though because time is money and this tutorial has already been long enough. So here in After Effects, I'll just double click in our project window and navigate to the folder we saved our renders to. And I'll just click on the first TIFF here and make sure TIFF sequence is checked. Hit open. And that'll import our renders as an image sequence, which you can use essentially as a video file. So since our images have an alpha, I'm just going to check straight unmatted. That'll just import the alpha channel correctly. And here's our image sequence. So I'll just drop this down here to create a new composition. And looking good. Right here you can really see the light we animated that goes across the front of our title. Just gives it a cool look. So let's create ourselves a new background. I'm going to go to Layer, New, Solid. Color doesn't matter because we're going to add a ramp onto it. So we're going to go to Effect, Generate, and it might be a little off the screen here, but it's just called ramp. And in the ramp settings, we'll just change it from a linear ramp to radial ramp and move this dark part here to the bottom and the bright part here to the top, something like that. And then I want to change the black to more of a dark gray color, and I want to change the white to black. So I don't know if you can see it in the video capture, but we have some banding issues happening here, and the easiest way to fix that is to just turn up the ramp scatter. And I don't know if you can see it in the video capture, but it just gets rid of those band issues. Good, let's move our background layer to the bottom so our render sequence is on top. I'm just going to animate the opacity for both of these layers. So I'll just select both layers and hit T on the keyboard to bring up the opacity. Somewhere around a second and a half. I'll just add a keyframe for the opacity of both the layers and then move our time slider back to the beginning and turn the opacity all the way off. So that way it just nicely fades in. We can even have it fade in a little longer than that. So maybe like over 2 seconds. Looking good so far. Let's add an adjustment layer by going to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. That'll just allow us to add a couple effects to our title. So let's go ahead and adjust the colors a little bit. So with our adjustment layer selected, I'll go up to Effect, Color Correction, and Curves. I'm just going to brighten the whole thing up a bit, then pull the shadows back down. So we get a nice contrasty image. And now I want to add a green tint to our title overall. So let's drop down from RGB to the red channel. And I'll just pull down on the red channel and then I'll give us a little bit of a green tint. Just a little bit. Give it some flavor. Now if you look back at my test animation, you can kind of see that the letters are out of focus in the beginning and then they pull into focus as the letters animate together. So to do that, I'm going to stay in the same adjustment layer that our curves are in and just add an effect for blur. We could just do something simple here like a Gaussian blur. So at around maybe 3 seconds here, so we can add a keyframe for the blurriness at 0%. And when we drag the time slider back to the beginning, we can crank up the blurriness to maybe 20 or so. That way when it animates in, it's out of focus and then blurs into focus. So that's what that looks like. And the last thing I want to do to make this title complete is add a glow on top of everything. So I'm just going to stay in the same adjustment layer as the rest of our stuff and add Effect, Stylize, Glow. And you can see right off the bat it makes the highlights glow. But I'm actually going to do something a little different for this. I'm going to go down to Glow Dimensions and change the settings from horizontal and vertical to just horizontal. And if I crank up the glow radius, you can see it makes this cool streaky looking glow effect, which is pretty cool. And that's about it for this tutorial. Of course, if you're feeling a bit crazy, you can go ahead and throw a lens flare on top of this thing. Because let's face it, lens flares solve every problem known to man. And they create equally as many problems as well. But that's alright. Thanks everybody for watching. If you want to see more of these tutorials, you can find them over here on the YouTube page. Hopefully this tutorial wasn't too long for you guys. I try to keep them a bit on the shorter side. But, you know, if you have a problem with it, tough crap.